Listen closely, because if you've ever felt lost or pulled in 100 directions, this might be the one message that ties your life back together. Across centuries and continents, through deserts, valleys, palaces, and marketplaces, one call kept returning like an echo that never dies. Worship Allah alone, without partners, and build a life of justice and mercy. Before we go deeper, tell me this. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. Every prophet carried this same light, not to perform for crowds, but to rescue hearts drowning in noise. They were human, eating food, walking among their people, marrying, raising children, and trading honestly, so no one could say the path to God was only for angels. They spoke the languages of their nations, so truth felt like home, not a riddle from far away. Their miracles were never parlor tricks. They were precise signs by Allah's permission, opening eyes too stubborn to see. When they warned, it was never to humiliate. When they gave glad tidings, it was never to flatter. They modeled character before they spoke a single sentence, proving that the strongest dawah is the life you live when no one is clapping. They refused payment for guidance because the reward they sought was with Allah alone, teaching us that truth is not for sale and dignity is priceless. The Quran preserves their stories not as bedtime tales, but as a map for your next decision, your next conversation, your next test. Look closely and you'll see the same thread in every era. Tawheed anchoring the heart, Sabra holding the line under pressure, Shukr turning blessings into worship, and mercy softening even the hardest conversations. These were not celebrities competing for attention. They were caretakers of the soul, farmers of faith planting seeds in soil that didn't always welcome rain. Some audiences applauded, others mocked, some plotted, and some believed with tears. Yet the message kept walking forward, unbothered by fashion, unchanged by power. And today, when the world sells you a new identity every week, the prophetic call stands like a lighthouse. Worship the One, serve with integrity, protect the weak, trade fairly, keep your promises, and know that success is measured by obedience, not by the size of your platform. If your life has felt scattered, take this as a beginning, because that one message is enough to reorder your priorities, clean your intentions, and turn every ordinary day into a stairway back to Allah. Adam's story begins where human dignity begins. Allah fashioned him from clay, breathed into him of his spirit, and taught him the name's knowledge so deep that even the angels stood in awe. When the angels were commanded to prostrate to Adam in honor of that divine gift, Iblis refused, swollen with pride, and from that arrogance, a conflict unfolded that still touches every temptation you face. Adam and Hawa lived in the garden with provision and peace, yet a whisper found them, a promise packaged like kindness but empty at its core. They slipped, and the earth opened as a new classroom, harder than the garden, but perfect for growth. Here is the heart of the lesson. They learned words of repentance, and Allah turned to them in mercy. Sin did not end their relationship with their Lord, denial would have. So the first legacy of humanity is not perfection but return fall, admit, ask, and rise again. On earth, Adam was not a castaway. He was a prophet with a mission: teach, worship, justice, gratitude, and responsibility to every child who would someday call this planet home. Work became worship when done with honesty. Family became a trust when nurtured with compassion. And gratitude became the engine that turns breath into blessing. From Adam's line came Idris, raised to a high station, remembered for truthfulness and perseverance, signaling that excellence is not a one-time act, but a steady climb. And the test that began with a whisper still plays in our daily lives, voices that call us to shortcuts, to envy, to a pride that refuses to bow to truth when it arrives. Adam teaches us the courage to own our choices and the confidence to seek Allah's door again and again. If you have ever said, "It's too late for me," listen to this first human speak across the ages. The door is still open, and your next sincere astaghfirullah can turn a page you thought was already burned. So build your life on the first story: honor, knowledge, responsibility, and repentance. Because the journey of every prophet after Adam begins with these 4 pillars, and your journey can, too, starting now. The story of a single man standing against a flood of mockery is not a tale of defeat, but a blueprint for unshakable patience, and that man is Nuh. He spoke to his people openly in daylight and quietly in the hush of night, calling them to worship Allah alone, to mend their wrongs, to give back what they had taken, to abandon cruelty, and to walk toward mercy before the tide of consequences rose. Imagine a lifetime stretched across generations, children who grew into elders, elders who buried their elders while he kept returning with the same calm invitation. Seek forgiveness from your Lord. He will send rain upon you in showers, increase you in wealth and sons, make for you gardens and rivers. He promised growth without greed and prosperity without pride, and still they placed fingers in their ears and wrapped themselves in garments of denial, as if truth were cold, wind and arrogance a warm blanket. The laughter he faced was not a chorus of wit, but a shield for guilty hearts. The insults were not clever speeches, but tremors of fear from people who knew that an idol cannot answer when life begins to burn. Nuh did not measure success by applause. He measured it by obedience, by the quiet ledger of effort that only Allah counts. When revelation came with an instruction that mocked worldly logic, build an ark on dry ground, he began to cut wood and strike nails with the same patience he had once used to strike words into closed doors. Ridicule became a daily weather report. "You are a carpenter of madness," they said. "You hammer delusions into planks and call them salvation." Yet he kept building, teaching us that the command of Allah is the blueprint, and time is the craftsman, and the one who persists will one day step into what others could only imagine. The ark rose like a sermon in timber, its ribs a sanctuary for pairs of creatures and a remnant of believers whose hearts had already crossed over to safety before their feet did. When springs burst from the earth and the sky opened, it was not chaos but command, the meeting of waters that had been waiting for a single word. Picture homes, markets, laughter, arguments, and plans dissolving into the same grey swell, and know that every civilization that measures its worth without God will eventually learn how small a city is next to a single decree. Nuh called to his son, blood of his blood, calling not with pride but with trembling love, "My son, ride with us, and do not be with the unbelievers." The boy chose a mountain, confident that height could replace guidance, and the wave rose between them like a curtain closing on a stage you hoped would end differently. Some lessons are written in ink and others are carved in water. This one says that lineage does not save, titles do not save, tears do not save, only Iman joined to obedience saves. The ark moved by Allah's name and settled upon Mount Judi when the command was lifted, and the first steps onto new ground felt like stepping out of a prayer into daylight. The survivors did not inherit the world as conquerors, but as caretakers, tasked to plant seeds of justice in soil still damp with memory. Nuh's supplication had always been for clarity, not revenge. His persistence had always been for hearts, not headlines. From him we learn to preach with patience, even when results look thin, to build what revelation commands even when the terrain mocks us, and to trust that saving one sincere soul is a triumph the angels celebrate. We learn that ridicule is not a verdict, that delay is not denial, that the flood which drowns arrogance becomes the ocean that carries obedience to shore. and we learn to hold our families with tenderness while telling them the truth uncompromised, because love without guidance becomes a rope that breaks at the first wave. If your efforts feel like planks on dry land, keep hammering. The weather of destiny can change with a single command, and the arc of your patience will float when the hour arrives. Nuh's wife is remembered among those who did not believe, reminding us that the house closest to a prophet can still be far from God, and that nearness in space is meaningless without nearness in faith. The end of his story is not about a storm, but about a covenant, that guidance remains available for those who listen, that the earth will always have a remnant who carry the call forward, and that the truest victory is to meet Allah with a heart that stayed steadfast when the world turned into water. The ark did not retire. It became a symbol your heart boards whenever you choose trust over trend, repentance over repetition, and obedience over opinion. So, in a world that praises novelty and mocks endurance, remember the craftsman of patience who kept building until the sky agreed with him. Hud walked among a people who built strength into their city walls and pride into their daily speech, a nation called Ad, whose muscles were firm, but whose morals had grown thin. He told them that power is a loan and rain is a mercy, that farms do not feed the soul and palaces do not guard the heart, and that worship of idols is at best a ritual of imagination and at worst a contract with injustice. They asked for proof while staring at proofs, the sky's generosity, the wind's precision, the miracle of breath. But they wanted a sign that flattered their idols, not a sign that humbled their arrogance. He warned them that gratitude extends the season of blessings and arrogance shortens it, and the wind that once kissed their fields became a blade that cut through the spine of their pride. Days and nights passed with a roar that peeled roofs from homes and boasts from throats, until the desert began to resemble a lesson written in sand and underlined by the hand of God. The empty fortress left behind by preachers, without a minbar power that forgets its source, becomes a museum of warnings. Hud's calm voice survives his people's storm, teaching that you do not shout down arrogance, you outlast it with truth. Ali came to Thamud, architects of the valley who carved their sense of permanence into mountains, believing stone could sign a treaty with time. He reminded them that the giver of stone is higher than stone, that justice is heavier than any boulder, and that humility is the only door through which real wisdom enters. The she-camel appeared as a sign, an animal set apart by Allah's command, with drinking rights that taught a community the grammar of fairness. The test was simple: share the water, restrain your greed, recognize a boundary drawn by the Lord of all boundaries. Their answer was a knife. The hamstringing of the camel was not mere cruelty. It was the community's signature under a declaration of war against clarity. When the cry came, it was not an accident of geology, but the moral echo of a people who cut what God said to leave whole. Homes once carved to defy weather became fossils of a defiance that could not outlast a single command, and the best architects learned too late that you cannot insulate a conscience from consequences. Yet in Talia's message lives an everyday mercy. The boundary lines of faith are opportunities to share, not cages to fear, and a society that honors them will find its thirst met without stealing from tomorrow. Lut lifted a mirror to a city smudged by its own desires, a people who normalized what faith and fitra both rejected. He was not a clerk of shame, but a physician of souls, pleading for a return to what heals the heart and preserves the family. His warnings met smirks, his hospitality met threats, and the sanctity of his home was mocked by a crowd that had turned appetite into ideology. To a society that had made sin a spectacle, the call to purity sounded like an insult, and to a prophet who measured love by what saves, their mockery sounded like a cry for help. When the decree arrived, angels did not ask for votes, and the ground beneath the city learned the cost of legalized corruption. His wife looked back, tethered to a place where the heart had already chosen to stay, and the lesson carved itself into history. You cannot walk forward while your loyalties face backward. Lut's legacy is not merely a story of punishment. It is a map for rebuilding honor guard, modesty, honor covenant, protect the sanctuary of the home, and never be so entertained by sin that you forget its invoice. In every age, there will be voices that turn desire into doctrine and mock virtue as if it were outdated clothing. Prophets reply by opening windows to fresh air and reminding us that freedom without moral shape is just wind that scatters what we love. Shuhaib stepped into Midian's markets, where scales were light and excuses were heavy, where profit margins measured worth and honesty was told to wait outside. He taught that faith without fairness is just theater, and that cheating in measures is not cleverness, but theft performed with a smile. He asked them to widen their understanding of worship until it reached the cashier's hand and the merchant's ledger, until a handshake weighed as much as a contract, and until an oath by Allah was not a marketing strategy, but a sacred boundary. The people answered, as markets often do, "Leave religion at the door, let numbers decide what's right." Shuaib replied with a vision that still startles the modern ear, "Let righteousness decide what numbers are allowed to do." When the day of the shade came, it was not a poetic metaphor but a precise event. The comfort they trusted became the cover under which justice arrived. The earthquake that followed did not target architecture. It targeted the lie that a thriving economy can float on dishonest scales. The moral is not that trade is sinful, but that trade without truth is a slow-motion collapse. And the first tremor is felt in hearts that learn to rationalize small wrongs until a city's conscience disappears behind daily profit. These 4 stories braid into a single rope that can pull any society back from the edge. Hud warns the strong that strength without gratitude becomes wind-swept ruin. Thalia warns builders that landmarks without humility become gravestones with beautiful facades. Lut warns communities that normalized desire can make a city famous and doomed at the same time. Shuhaib warns merchants that tricking a scale is just a small rehearsal for tricking a soul. Together, they invite us to rewrite our daily routines, how we speak, how we trade, how we love, how we set boundaries, so that worship is not confined to prayer times, but expands to the full architecture of our lives. If you want your home to be safer than a mountain on the day of flood, build it with truth. If you want your hands to be steadier than stone when the cry arrives, use them to share water today. If you want your heart to outrun a city's collapse, tie it to Allah's rope and do not look back. And if you want your ledger to survive the shade and the quake, weigh your words and your wares with the same scale, one that remembers the eye that never sleeps. The prophets did not come to decorate our myths. They came to renovate our lives, and their tools are still on the table. Gratitude, humility, chastity, honesty, patience, repentance, and courage in the face of crowds. Take them up, and the winds that once threatened your house will one day carry your prayers home. Ibrahim's journey begins with a question that every thinking heart eventually asks: what is worthy of my absolute devotion? He watched the star glitter, the moon glow, the sun blaze, and he watched each of them set, not out of cynicism but out of clarity, and he said with the honesty of a mind that wants truth more than comfort, "I do not love those that set." In a world that rented its gods from stonecutters and returned them for repairs, he broke idols not only with an axe, but with a logic that still slices through pretension today. He left the biggest idol standing and hung the axe upon it as a courtroom exhibit for a nation to judge, then asked the question that empties the marketplace of false gods: If they cannot speak, if they cannot think, if they cannot defend themselves, how will they ever defend you when the sky turns dark? Their fury became a furnace, and the furnace became a garden when Allah said, "Be cool and peaceful for Ibrahim," proving that fire obeys its Lord even when tyrants do not. He migrated because faith frequently means moving your feet after you move your heart, and he traveled not to escape responsibility, but to find the horizon where obedience becomes community. Along the way, hospitality poured from him like a river he prepared for guests before they finished knocking, and angels smiled in human form at a house that made generosity look effortless. Good news arrived in a place that had only known waiting, and the veil of age was pierced by a promise named Ishaq, while an older promise already lived and breathed in a crib named Ismail. Then came a command that sounds like a contradiction until trust translates it. A father asked to leave a mother and infant in a valley without crops, without rooftops, without any evidence except the certainty that the provider of provision had given the order. When Hajar asked, "Did Allah command this?" and he nodded, she closed the door on fear and opened the window to tawakkul with a sentence that still steadies the shaking. "Then he will not abandon us." Her feet wrote a dua upon the sand between the Fa and Marwa, and her run became our right, because desperation that runs toward Allah becomes worship in motion. The earth learned her intention and split with mercy, and Zamzam burst like a smile from the unseen, a spring for a cradle and a sign for an ummah, teaching that water flows where mothers trust. Years turned like prayer beads, and a boy became his father's companion, steady-footed and bright-eyed, and the test returned like a tide that comes back for anything it left on the shore. In a dream repeated for certainty, Ibrahim saw himself laying his beloved down for sacrifice, and love's hardest proof stood quietly beside him and said, "Father, do what you are commanded. You will find me, if Allah wills, among the bruf patient." Knives cut meat, not decrees, and Allah ransomed the child with a magnificent sacrifice, carving into the world a festival where obedience is celebrated with generosity and blood is replaced with remembrance. From that valley of trust, father and son raised the foundations of the Kaaba, stone by stone, dua by dua, their hands trembling with hope as they asked that this house draw hearts and cleanse them, that a messenger arise among their descendants to teach the book and wisdom. Hajj was braided from their footsteps, ihram that strips the wardrobe of ego, tawaf that makes the heart orbit the one, saki that honors a mother's sprint, Arafah that gathers a nation under a sky-sized dua, Muzdalifah that teaches stillness under stars, and Mina that trains wrists to throw stones at whispers. Ibrahim was named Khalilullah, the intimate friend of Allah, not because he lived an easy life, but because he kept choosing the caller over the cost, and friendship with the divine is just another name for consistent surrender. His debates with a king who bragged of life and death showed how tyrants borrow vocabulary they cannot afford, and his quiet conversation with birds restored taught him that the one who revives feathers in the wind also revives certainty in the chest. He visited a son after long absence and measured a household's faith by the gratitude in a wife's words, reminding us that the architecture of belief begins in the kitchen, in the patience of waiting, in the texture of how we describe our lives when no audience is watching. When angels announced a punishment for a corrupt valley, he pleaded with compassion that sought rescue even for strangers, and Allah named him forbearing, tender-hearted, and devout, proving that firmness for truth and softness for people are not opposites, but two wings of the same bird. From his duas bloomed two rivers of guidance through Ismail to the messenger who would complete prophethood, and through Ishaq to Yaqub, and a legacy of patience that would one day be spelled with a boy's beauty and a father's tears. If you want your faith to survive furnaces and famines, drink from this chapter until your tongue tastes surrender. Break what breaks you. Trust beyond what you can see. Build worship into your days like bricks into a house, and let every sacrifice turn love into a ladder to Allah. From Yaqub we learn a phrase that sounds gentle and fights like a sword. Sabr Jamil, beautiful patience that neither complains against Allah nor denies the weight on the heart. He loved Yusuf with the kind of careful love that knows genius can attract jealousy. And when the boy described a dream where the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed, the father heard destiny knocking and told him to keep the vision safe from brothers who were not yet safe from themselves. But envy is a locksmith that makes its own keys, and a plan was whispered that began with play and ended with a shirt torn by wolves that had never seen the boy they were accused of eating. The well opened like a false grave and became a womb for prophecy, while a caravan's bucket rose with a treasure they called merchandise, and the story moved to a new stage where Allah writes with invisible ink. In Egypt, a noble household received Yusuf and saw in him what the jealous had refused to see, a grace that made rooms brighter and tasks lighter, the calm of someone who belongs to Allah before he belongs to any address. Temptation dressed itself not in coarse sin, but in luxury and privacy, the kind of invitation that flatters a man's youth and promises secrecy, and he ran toward a door that refused to open, because some doors are meant to teach you that escape is itself a dua. His shirt tore from behind, and truth arrived in the geometry of fabric, yet rumors gossiped, like wind among women who slice fruit while cutting reputations. And he chose prison over yielding, because sometimes dignity is a cell you walk into willingly to keep the heart free. In that space of iron and keys, he became a counselor to the forgotten, interpreting dreams with a steady humility that always began with credits to Allah, teaching monotheism between sips of water, as if Tawhid were the only cup that truly quenches. The king dreamed of lean cows swallowing fat ones and withered ears devouring green, and prophecy opened the riddle with a plan. Harvest in years of plenty with discipline, store against the famine with foresight, build a public good out of private restraint. His innocence was confirmed not by the convenience of amnesia, but by the investigation he demanded, because a believer does not accept freedom if it leaves a stain upon truth. Elevated to stewardship, he distributed grain as if passing out hope, and lines formed that would one day include faces from childhood brothers who did not recognize a man perfected by patience. He hosted them, tested them, returned goods to their saddlebags like a secret mercy, and eventually held his younger brother close under protection that looked like strategy but felt like healing. When the moment ripened, he spoke in a voice that had forgiven them before he named them, "No blame upon you today." And the brothers learned what envy had refused to learn, that innocence is stronger than plotting, and that mercy can lift a family higher than apologies alone. He sent his shirt ahead, a garment that had once been stained by a lie, now carrying the scent of truth, and Yaqub's eyes recovered, because Allah, who returns sight to pupils, also returns meaning to pain. The reunion was not simply hugs, it was sujud shaped like gratitude. A family bowed to Allah for stitching a torn household into a banner of guidance. The dream completed itself decades after dawn, and Yusuf looked back without bitterness and said the line that graduates believers from grief, "Indeed, my Lord is subtle in what he wills." His integrity and privacy became influence in public. His refusal to betray turned into the authority to feed a nation. His jail became his resume, his sabr became his crown. And Ayub, from the same school of patience, stands as a minaret, whispering to every patient heart that nothing you lose in Allah's path is wasted. Health drained from him like a departing tide, wealth scattered like leaves in a storm, Companions thinned until silence sat where laughter used to sit, and yet he did not accuse the giver of taking. He only asked the healer to heal after praising the one whose gifts had once filled his hands. His dua was modest even in desperation. Harm has touched me, and you are the most merciful of the merciful. And paradise leaned closer to listen to a voice that still called Allah by his tenderness, while pain tried to rename the world. A spring was commanded to break the crust of sorrow, and when he washed in it, restoration walked back into his life, the way dawn crawls back into a sky that had briefly forgotten color. His oath, made in a moment of human frustration, was resolved by a bundle of soft grass, a merciful exit from a vow that might have hurt someone he loved, teaching scholars and shepherds alike that Allah writes leniency into law for those who fear him. From Ayub we learn to distinguish complaint to Allah from complaint about Allah, and to find the line between honest grief and a bitterness that tries to dethrone the one who sustains us even while we ache. The stories of Yaqub, Yusuf, and Ayub are not linked by coincidence, but by curriculum. Guard the dream, guard the self, and guard your tongue when the night is long. A father's restraint kept hope alive when evidence from pointed elsewhere. A son's chastity built a bridge from prison to palace, and a prophet's gratitude in illness turned pain into worship. If your family is tangled, practice sabr jamil, and keep a corner of your heart ready to believe that a shirt can still carry good news. If temptation knocks wearing kindness and perfume, run toward doors even if they are locked. For sometimes Allah only opens them after he sees you run. If loss has rewritten your days, whisper Ayub's dua with the certainty that the one who kept your heart beating without your command can also command a spring to rise under your feet. Let these lives teach you the algebra of trust. Subtract envy, multiply gratitude, divide your pain by dua, and add forgiveness until the sum equals peace. And when your own dream feels delayed, remember that destiny keeps appointments in Allah's calendar, not ours, and that what is subtle today will one day stand in front of you, wearing a name you recognize and a wisdom you finally understand. Tyranny sharpened its knives on a cradle, and yet the decree of a king could not outwrite the script of mercy that began with a basket on the Nile. A mother's heart beat louder than the river, but revelation taught her a rhythm of trust. Nurse him, place him in the current when you fear for him, and know that we will return him and make him of our messengers. The water carried a secret past, the eyes of soldiers, past palace stones and polished floors, straight into the arms of the very household that issued the order to drown him. Milk refused every nurse until the river's story circled back to the one heart Allah had promised to soothe, and a mother was paid to serve the child she was already serving for free. He grew beneath ceilings that hated his future and on streets that needed it, learning the language of power without letting it teach his soul to bow to anything but Allah. A single moment, an unintended blow, a life lost, a conscience struck awake, sent him into the desert to learn the art of honest exile. Midian opened like a workshop where humility and responsibility are forged side by side, and in the shade of a well he defended the dignity of two women, not for reward but because righteousness is a reflex before it is a reputation. A home was offered, years of shepherding hardened his muscles and softened his heart, and marriage placed mercy into his routine until mercy felt like breathing. Then, in a valley hushed by stars, a fire that did not burn became a message that did remove your sandals on holy ground, for you are in the presence of the one who calls you by name. The staff in his hand learned new grammar and became a serpent by permission. His hand shone like a sign torn from daylight, and excuses melted in the warmth of the caller who knows every fear, every stutter, and every memory of failure. He asked for a companion and was given Harun, a brother whose gentleness could braid with resolve, because truth walks best when it holds both firmness and kindness in the same stride. They went to a man who said, "I am your Lord Most High," a sentence heavy enough to sink a nation, and asked for the simple dignity of letting slaves go free to worship in peace. Signs unfolded like pages, staff and hand, drought and flood, locusts and lice, frogs and blood, each one a chance for a heart to bend before a sea would have to split. Pharaoh's magicians saw ropes melt into repentance and fell in sujud, not to a spectacle, but to a truth that recognized them faster than their hands could drop their tools. Arrogance negotiated and reneged until negotiation was no longer merciful, and an ummah moved by night with sandals damp from dew and hearts warmed by trust, arriving at the edge of water with an army's dust rising behind them like a second horizon. The sea looked unwalkable until obedience stepped into it, and waves stood like walls while a path appeared that had been waiting since creation for feet that refused to bow to anything but Allah. They crossed, and the water returned with the memory of a promise, and a body that once called itself Lord became a sign preserved for reciters and rulers who confuse a throne with divinity. Freedom was not the end of the syllabus, it was the introduction, and the desert became a classroom where hunger and hope share a table. Manna and quails tasted like effortless provision, but easy food cannot cook a nation's character without commandments, and Moses climbed the mountain to receive a law that teaches hands what hearts should have already known. Tablets carried the weight of guidance, while the valley below learned how fast impatience builds a calf when it cannot see the shepherd. He returned not with a celebrity's temper, but with a prophet's grief, shattering stone to awaken stone-like hearts. And Harun stood unharmed by accusation because his gentleness had tried to slow a fall that could not be stopped by force alone. Repentance became the bridge back to dignity, and the covenant was renewed with clarity: worship none but Allah, honor the parents who once lifted you, protect life, guard truth, keep promises, and remember that business lying is still lying. Springs burst from rock when a staff pointed, shade traveled like a cloud that knew their names, and yet every generation must learn that miracles cannot tutor a heart that refuses homework. The command to enter the sacred land arrived with the scale of struggle, but complaints weighed more than courage, and the desert answered with years that measure maturity, one lesson at a time. Through it all, Musa spoke to his Lord at a distance chosen by mercy, asked to see what sight cannot hold, and was taught that nearness is measured in obedience, not in optics. He carried a people when they tried to carry their old habits into a new life, reminding us that liberation without law is just a longer route to the same prison. His anger was never for ego but for justice. His prayers were never for applause but for survival. And his story carves this warning into every era: do not trade a calf you can touch for a God you cannot see, because idols are built from impatience, and impatience is just pride wearing the mask of urgency. When they asked for a God like other nations, he asked if they wanted a lostness like other nations too. And when they begged for water, he taught them that worship is the first ingredient in every well. Harun's voice tuned the community back to gentleness whenever zealotry tried to confuse harshness with strength, and together they preached with a symmetry that still corrects our extremes. Truth without mercy becomes a weapon, and mercy without truth becomes permission for decay. Their legacy does not end at a shoreline of miracles. It continues wherever a leader insists that law is a blessing, wherever a teacher believes a wandering heart can still become a nation, and wherever a believer throws his staff of fear onto the ground and watches it transform into a sign that moves him forward. If your sea feels closed, remember who opens it. If your desert feels long, remember who sends shade. And if your people try your patience, remember that patience is the only road wide enough to carry a promise from slavery to sanctuary. Power met prophecy on a battlefield where a young man stepped forward with more faith than armor, and the fall of Jalut sounded less like a victory shout and more like the beginning of a curriculum titled Responsibility. Dawood received kingship and prophethood, two weights that crush pretenders and refine the sincere. And Allah armed him, not just with a sling and a song, but with a voice that made mountains and birds join his praise until creation felt like a choir. The Zabur poured into his heart like a river of remembrance, and every dawn he tuned justice as carefully as he tuned worship, because a ruler without dhikr is a danger, and a worshipper without justice is a missing verse. Iron softened in his hands as if metal remembered its maker and obeyed a prophet's touch, teaching craftsmen and kings that skill is not the enemy of piety, but its expression, and that industry built with gratitude becomes defense, not vanity. He judged with a conscience that feared only Allah, and when two disputants tested his wisdom, sheep grazing by night and a field left injured, he ruled with fairness that made the owner whole without ruining the shepherd, and revelation confirmed an insight that balanced property with compassion. When his heart once moved faster than deliberation, he bowed with tears that teach leaders to apologize before power turns them into statues, and Allah forgave, lifting him higher through the humility that makes kings safe to follow. His household learned that piety wears an apron as often as a crown, that fasting, prayer, and charity braid into leadership, and that a king must be first in service and last in entitlement. He raised Suleiman not on thrones but on principles, and a son asked not for palaces, but for a kingdom that would serve truth in ways no one had seen, a doer so ambitious in piety that it frightened laziness and rewarded imagination, anchored in gratitude. Suleiman inherited a realm where the wind was a courier and distance felt like a courtesy, and the jinn labored under command to build arches, statues without faces that tempt worship, and cauldrons as large as civic projects, all while he reminded them and himself that power is a trust and trusts are audited. He listened to the speech of birds, and an ant colony wrote a verse in humility when its leader warned the others to enter their homes, lest an army trample them without knowing. Suleiman smiled at a lesson that even authority can be innocent of harm while still causing it, and he thanked the one who made him hear what proud men often ignore. The Hudhud reported news from a kingdom that worshipped the sun, a queen whose governance was orderly but whose theology bowed to a star. And Suleiman crafted a letter that opened with the name and continued with peace, because diplomacy that greets with peace often travels further than swords. Sheba's throne arrived before a blink could complete itself, not as a stunt but as a sign that the unseen serves those who serve the Most High. And when she entered a hall that looked like water but was glass, a queen saw through an illusion and glimpsed a greater clarity. Truth asks us to lift the veil from both belief and habit. She submitted not to Suleiman but with him to Allah, and politics learned that the most beautiful victory is when opponents become allies in worship, not trophies in a museum of conquest. Suleiman checked arrogance like a watchman, reminding his court whenever the wind obeyed him that the wind obeys only Allah and merely honors a servant for a season. And whenever a palace rose too tall, he taught builders to inscribe gratitude into its foundation. He oversaw a workforce of the seen and the unseen without becoming intoxicated by it, and when death visited, it found him leaning on a staff in prayer. His body remained as if supervising, and only when a creature nibbled the wood and he fell did the jinn realize they do not know the unseen, a lesson carved for charlatans who sell secrets they never had. Dawood's song and Suleiman's silence each made the world safer, one by teaching hearts to love obedience, the other by teaching power to fear its Lord. Together they model a civilization where worship tunes industry, where law humbles kings before it humbles citizens, and where mercy is not weakness, but the oil that keeps the engine of justice from burning itself out. Dawood taught that you face giants with reliance before strategy, that you soften iron to shield the weak before you craft art for the elite, and that you judge cases with a humility that lets revelation correct you without defensiveness. Sulaiman taught that knowledge of creation increases gratitude, not arrogance, that a throne is just a table where responsibilities eat and leave their dishes for you to wash, and that wealth without worship is just ornate poverty. When mountains echo your dhikr, remember they echo only because the Lord of Mountains commanded it, and when ants alter their path for your caravan, remember that leadership is measured by how gently you tread. A queen who once bowed to the sun discovered the warmth of a light that never sets. An empire learned to say Bismillah before it said, by order of the king. And the jinn learned that strength is not a license but a leash attached to accountability. If you carry talent in your hands like iron waiting to be softened, ask for its purpose before you ask for its fame. If you carry authority like a wind eager to move, anchor it with gratitude before it turns into a storm. If you carry a platform like a hall of glass, invite people to see through it to the truth, not to stare at reflections. And if you carry a family name like a crown, polish it with service, not with slogans, because Dawood and Sulaiman rise again in any home where skill bows to worship and rule bows to reason. The harmony of their lives is a blueprint for rebuilding any city. Start with prayer that invites mountains to listen, continue with craftsmanship that protects the vulnerable, negotiate with letters that begin in the name, and end each day with gratitude that counts blessings faster than it counts victories. When power offers you shortcuts, remember that the glass floor can look like water, and only truth can tell you where to place your feet. When victory tempts you to sing about yourself, remember a prophet who sang about Allah until steel softened and birds learned the chorus. And when the unseen whispers offers of influence, remember a king who leaned in prayer until even jinn realized that the unseen belongs to the one who gave it and can take it, leaving only the deeds that were done sincerely for him. Zachariah watched over Maryam and found provisions with her that had no earthly delivery, and the sight did not spark envy, but dua. If sustenance can arrive unannounced, then the heart that has grown old with longing can still be surprised by mercy. He asked not for any child, but for a child righteous enough to inherit worship, a lamp that would keep the sanctuary bright when his steps were gone. Age does not frighten the one who writes time, and a barren wife is not a barrier to the Lord who creates without pattern or permission. So he was given a sign to be silent from ordinary speech for days, while remembrance filled the space where small talk used to live. The child named Yahya arrived with a purity that did not perform. He carried wisdom while other boys carried games, and he stepped away from pride the way a careful walker avoids mud, leaving footprints too clean for arrogance to follow. His heart was soft to the poor and firm with truth, a young prophet whose courage did not require cruelty, and when he spoke, people heard a voice that remembered heaven more than it feared earth. Meanwhile, Maryam stood at the center of a miracle that magnifies both chastity and power, an honored woman who received the visit of an angel, bringing news that would bend calendars and correct theologies. She conceived Isa by Allah's command without a father, a birth that rewrote the rules men thought they understood and proved that the Creator is not trapped by the patterns he made. Labor moved her to the trunk of a palm, and revelation guided her to dates and water, as if creation itself were midwifing mercy. Then she returned to her people with a silence that protected honor better than 1,000 explanations. The cradle became a pulpit, and the child spoke by Allah's permission, declaring servanthood, announcing scripture, honoring his mother in a sentence that tied wonder to worship and placed the miracle firmly under the sovereignty of its giver. Isa grew into a sign who healed the blind and the leper and raised the dead by Allah's permission, never claiming divinity for himself, always pointing past the hand to the hand that lifts all things. He fashioned a bird from clay, and it flew by permission. He read hearts not to embarrass but to clean them. He preached a law refined and merciful, reminding a community that obedience without compassion hardens, and compassion without obedience melts. His disciples gathered not as collectors of tricks but as students of Tawhid, helpers who said, "We are the supporters of Allah," meaning we will support His truth on earth with our small bodies until His vast help descends. The opposition he faced mixed politics with piety, councils that loved their seats more than their scriptures, people too afraid of losing control to recognize what purity looks like when it walks. Plots were drawn, betrayal purchased with coins, and a trap closed on an innocent man, but Allah is the best of planners, and the one they intended to crucify was not the one they sought. Allah raised Isa, alive and honored, and before the hour He will return with justice, shattering the cross of misunderstanding, killing the false Messiah, and uniting truth in a way that leaves no room for confusion, proving that prophethood is a chord that still vibrates in history when Allah plucks it. Between Zachariah's whisper for a son and Maryam's quiet strength under a palm, between Yahya's fearless innocence and Isa's clean defiance of false worship, a single theme walks: purity without arrogance, power without violence, miracles without self-praise, and a relentless pointing upward to the one who authors beginnings and endings. If your hope feels too old, remember a prophet who learned that time serves Allah, not the other way around. If your reputation is under accusation, remember a woman who let a cradle speak and trusted that Allah's defense is stronger than noise. If your faith is thin, remember a child who became a river of cures by permission, reminding every witness that healing belongs to the healer. And if your world is loud with claims about Twal Isa, some crowning him beyond his words, others denying him beyond his signs, stand where he stood, a servant of Allah, a prophet of mercy, a miracle entrusted to a mission, destined to return not as a spectacle, but as a gardener who pulls up the last weeds of deception. The chapter of these births is a syllabus for renewal. Ask humbly, receive gratefully, live purely, preach courageously, and never let a miracle distract you from the miracle maker. Long before his message stirred a city, Muhammad was known by the simplest title and the hardest to earn: Al-Amin, the trustworthy. People stored their fears and their valuables with him because truth felt safe in his presence, and the Kaaba's dispute over the black stone ended in his hands with a wisdom that made rivals nod, as if the solution had always been waiting in his smile. At 40, in the stillness of Hira, the knight learned new vocabulary when the angel Jibreel arrived with the first command: read, and a man who did not read in the world began to read the world by the light of revelation. The Quran descended not as a book tossed from heaven, but as a lived river, verse by verse, event by event, healing a wound exactly where it hurt, training a people one ayah at a time until their hearts could carry nations. The earliest believers were punished for a faith that asked them to stop bowing to stone and start bowing to the maker of stone, and they held on through boycott and torture, hiding dhikr in the rhythms of breath while the city tried to starve their hope. When the command to migrate came, the Hijra rewrote maps without changing the destination. Makkah's oppression became Medina's invitation, and two cities learned that geography is measured not by land, but by law. In Medina, revelation built a community that could carry mercy without dropping justice, a constitution that protected lives and rights across tribes and faiths, a market cleaned of cheating, a mosque that was part sanctuary, part court, part school, and part repair shop for any broken soul who walked in. Battle arrived as a last resort, governed by ethics that still embarrass modern generals. Do not kill non-combatants, do not demolish homes, do not burn trees, do not betray covenants. Fight only those who fight you, and when peace leans toward you, lean further. At Badr, a small band learned that numbers melt under reliance. At Uhud, a painful lesson taught that disobedience opens doors no sword can close. At the trench, strategy and dua braided into a shield that outlasted a siege and outthought an enemy. Treaties were signed even when they looked unequal, because long vision respects peace enough to walk the slower road, and Hudaybiyah turned an apparent concession into a highway for dawah, proving that a pen can conquer what an arrow never reaches. The Quran kept shaping character, while law refined conduct, prohibiting intoxicants in steps that respected human struggle, abolishing usury that fattens a few while starving many, commanding fairness in testimony even against yourself, and lifting the status of women from property to partners in faith, with rights to inheritance, consent, and dignity that still outpace cultures forgetful of revelation. Mercy walked like a neighbor in his street. He shortened prayers when a child cried, so a mother would not worry. He stood when a funeral passed, whether the deceased was Muslim or not. He mended his own clothes, milked his own goat, carried bricks for his own mosque, and fed the stray cat that slept on his garment, teaching that greatness is domestic before it is diplomatic. He forgave the one who threw dust on his head and visited the one who threw trash at his door when she fell ill. He split a single cup of milk among companions with a distribution that made each sip taste like equity, and he turned enemies into brothers by refusing to let yesterday decide the size of tomorrow's mercy. Revelation corrected even his beloveds when they slipped, so no one could say the law spared the close and crushed the distant, and he accepted those corrections with a humility that made obedience look like honor, not burden. The conquest of Makkah arrived not with drums but with dhikr. Heads were bowed in gratitude, idols fell like tired lies, and the city braced for revenge but received a general amnesty. No blame upon you today, a sentence that emptied prisons of fear and filled homes with a new beginning. He cleansed the Kaaba without burning the city, returned keys to their keepers, and made former persecutors the future custodians of a sanctuary that would welcome the world, showing that Islamic power is not a hammer, but a scale. His household modeled tenderness without weakness. He raced with his wife and let love laugh in a community that often confused piety with frowns. He stood long in prayer while his feet swelled, yet never forgot the neighbor's hunger. He lengthened his sujood when a grandson climbed his back, so play would not be interrupted by formality, demonstrating that worship and affection are not rivals but siblings who hold hands. When delegations came from across Arabia, he taught leaders how to lead by serving. He sent teachers instead of tax collectors, and he warned governors that the slightest theft from public trust would be a fire on the day when secrets are loud. He grieved like a man and trusted like a prophet, weeping for his infant son Ibrahim, while reminding all who watched that hearts ache and eyes weep, but we speak only what pleases our Lord. As the mission neared completion, the farewell sermon gathered a sea of witnesses and poured principles into them like seeds. Your blood, property, and honor are sacred. Usury is abolished. Women's rights are a trust to be guarded. Racism is a lie that dies under the feet of piety. Every Muslim is a brother to every other Muslim, and all humanity stands from a single pair. No Arab is superior to a non-Arab, and no non-Arab to an Arab, except by God consciousness and good action. He asked them to deliver the message to those absent, and history answered with a chain of hearts that still carries the Quran from tongue to tongue and the Sunnah from life to life. The miracle he left is not just words auditioning for belief. It is a recited reality. The Quran memorized by millions, preserved without alteration, challenging poets and philosophers and programmers alike to produce anything shorter, truer, cleaner, and kinder to the human soul. His Sunnah remains a map where you can find a ruling and a remedy in the same day: justice for contracts, patience for grief, play for children, respect for neighbors, rights for animals, rest for the earth on its day, and a prayer for every threshold you cross. When a man asked for a short path to salvation, he taught him to control his tongue, because societies survive or collapse in the space between a thought and a spoken word. And when another asked who is most deserving of good companionship, he said, "Your mother," and repeated it until motherhood stood taller than titles. He left this world after completing the message, with lips that moved in dua for his ummah, and a heart that still feels close enough to call us my brothers and sisters, though we have not seen him. His resting place is quiet, but his mercy still travels every time a shopkeeper refuses a lie for Allah's sake, every time a student studies with intention, every time a spouse forgives before being asked, every time a leader chooses justice over convenience. The light he carried flickers anew. To love him is to imitate him, not to turn him into an untouchable statue. To follow him is to lace up your mercy each morning, to tell the truth when it costs you, to greet first, to give first, to apologize first, to be the calmest in anger and the bravest in fear. And to honor his finality as the seal of the prophets is to recognize that guidance is complete. We are not waiting for a new recipe, but for better cooks. He has already given us the ingredients for a home, a market, a court, a city, and a soul that can face any century without losing its shape. If the world feels crowded with voices, take the voice that recites at dawn and stitches your heart back together. If your life feels complicated, use his Sunnah as a compass that reduces noise to direction. If your hope feels thin, remember a man who forgave a city that tried to break him and then turned enemies into neighbors by unlocking a door only mercy can open. The story does not end with his return to his Lord. It continues wherever someone hears read and reads themselves back into obedience, wherever someone hears go and migrates from sin to service, wherever someone hears forgive and drops a grudge like an idol, and wherever someone hears follow and finds that walking in his footsteps makes every road lead home.